moderator today. Today's session will be presented by Johan Nickel. He's a Microsoft certified trainer and cloud solution architect with great experience and passion in Microsoft 365 and Teams platform. He's currently based in Switzerland. If you face any audio or video issues during the webcast, please post your queries in the Q&A panel and our team is here to answer them all. Also, if you have any technical questions related to today's topic, please feel free to ask those as well. Now I would like to turn today's event over to Johan. Johan, you can take it from here.
Hi and a great welcome to day 2 of the Managing Microsoft Teams virtual training series. My name is Jochen Nickel. I'm a solution architect and a Microsoft certified trainer, and I'm working with you during this module today. Just allow me a short side note at the beginning of this module. I will do some demonstrations to show you some functionality in the Microsoft Cloud Services, and maybe you will face another interface or another functionality in the near future. So just be aware about the changes that Microsoft does on their own service. During this session, we have the complete focus on the implementation of security and governance, where we implement the lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams, the governance for Microsoft Teams, the security part, and specifically we go on the focus on the guest access itself. Planning and implementing a security and governance strategy for Microsoft Teams is a very important task, because it means that you are building a plan to get your work done effectively. So most projects consist of a beginning, a middle, and an end, and Teams do the same. But they can be constructed and used in such a variety of ways that it's not always obvious which stage of their life cycle they are in. So having a plan for specifically the security and governance management features will help you to track your organization's projects as they go through the different stages itself. So let's start to discuss the implementation of lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams. Teams itself provides a rich set of tools to implement collaboration lifecycle management processes for your organization. But we have a lot of tools around, like the Azure Active Directory, the whole Microsoft 365 functionality, and we need to really discuss all these topics to get a broad understanding about implementation, a whole lifecycle management strategy for Microsoft Teams. Planning and implementing a governance and lifecycle management for Microsoft Teams is a very important task for a consistent and well-organized communication and collaboration solution. Before deploying Microsoft Teams, you should really consider things such as who can create teams, what is the team's naming convention, whether to allow guest access, or any other kind of information what we will discuss during this session. So it's a great opportunity to go through that by building a plan to get really our work done effectively. And we help our organization or our customers to have well-constructed projects and that they can work through the whole life cycle they are actually in. First of all, we need to discuss the different objects which we receive when we implement a Microsoft Teams. The Teams itself, the channels, the different team access types, and the team user types and admin roles. Basically, a team is a collection of people, content, and tools for collaboration. A team defines who are the members of it and the permissions and policies that applies to those members. Teams are built on Microsoft 365 groups, which were formerly called Office 365 groups. They're based on the cross-application membership service in Office 365. It's an object in Azure Active Directory basically. So organizations can add or remove people from the group just as any other group-based security object in Active Directory, which we already know. The channels itself are the collaboration spaces within a team where the actual work is done. Each channel represents a different topic or work stream within the overall team. So for each channel, a folder is automatically created on the SharePoint site to store all the files shared to that channel itself. and it makes it very easy for users to find and work on the documents they care really about. Channels can also be extended with apps that are relevant to the particular work stream, for example. You can add Power BI dashboards to a channel to track the success of any aspect of your project, for example. On the other hand, we have the team access types. So we have basically two team access types. The first is private, the second one is public. Private teams are restricted to team members approved by the team owner. This is a typical setting for project teams and virtual teams in a large organization. Public teams, on the other side, are open for anyone in the organization to join directly. This is mainly useful for cooperation on topics of general interest to people in different departments working on different projects, for example. This is a good default setting for smaller organizations as well. Then we have the team user types and the admin roles. The team creator specifically has the permissions to create a group or team in the directory. But it's mainly done that the admin can constrain this user type to a subset of admins or users, for example. Then we have the team owner that manages the membership and settings for the team, and there can be as many as 100 team owners per team itself. So we have here a limitation of 100 people that can own this specific role. Then we have the team members. That's a quite easy one. It's a member of your organization who participates in a team itself. A guest is usually a user who's external to your organization, that is invited by the Azure Active Directory B2B process with an email address, and it's a guest user type, specifically in Azure Active Directory itself. In the following slide we see a summary of the different team user types and admin roles. Let's say a few specific things about it as well. The team creators can be limited in your organization by limiting the users that can create Microsoft 365 groups. That's a very common scenario, because if you just start with Microsoft Teams and you allow everyone to create Microsoft 365 groups in the different applications, like in Outlook, like in Microsoft Teams, over Jammer and so on, you will end up in a mess, specifically on data and different teams that will grow in an immense high speed in your organization. So it's always a good practice, really at the first time, just limiting the creation of groups, specific Microsoft 365 groups in your organization. Another quick tip on this: 100 team owners is also not really a good idea. So you need to have a process that you have one or basically two team owners on your side, that you can manage the different memberships and settings in your Microsoft Teams environment. That's a great tool to work with and to have a process established how you get a team owner, how you escalate to another team owner, what happens when a team owner leaves the organization, and so on. The team membership, I think that's quite an easy task on that, who participates in a specific team. But keep in mind that could also be a challenge to you as an administrator in your organization, or for the team owner itself, so that you really allow only the specific people you want to view the different stuff inside of your team. So really keep that in mind and prove exactly team membership with access reviews, for example, that you always recheck, is a team member really needed on this specific team or not. The same is this for the guest accounts, so that you really avoid data leakage, for example, to guests of your organization, external users. So it's also a good practice here to regularly review specific these guest users on your Microsoft Teams. We will see exactly these features later on also in a demonstration, but we will go through the different stages, and it should be clear what's a team creator, a team owner, a team member, and specifically this type of user, the guest user. If we talk about the team's lifecycle stages, we have the 3 specific stages. The beginning, where we talk about the creation of the team, setting up the channels. The middle, where the main work happens, and specifically in a team, the collaboration starts, you share documents, you work with the material, and obviously the stage 3, that we end or sunset a specific team, that the project is over or the different topic is no more interested inside of the organization. We will take a closer look during these 3 specific stages, what you can do, what are the decisions, and all the typical things what you need to know really about these stages. Okay, let's go through the different stages. Let's start with the beginning. So basically the beginning is how to create a team. What's specifically the purpose of a team? Who should belong to this team? Should it be a private or public one? Can new members add themselves, or do the team owners add them to the specific team? Who have the different permissions inside of this topic? So the first step obviously is to define exactly these different things about to really create a team or not. There are many ways you can start to create a team. For example, you can create the team from scratch, add the members by using individual email aliases or usernames, or you expand a specific distribution list, for example. You can also create a team from an existing team, and you can use its channels configuration and any app configuration as a template. You can optionally also use its membership list. You can also add the team to an existing Microsoft 365 group, which also gives the team access to its mailbox and SharePoint site, for example. You can use different tools to programmatically build up a specific team, for example with the Grave Teams API or with the PowerShell CMDlets that are available to create teams. The APIs can obviously be programmatically working to create teams based on a global address book attribute such a region or department, or a specific business process like client engagements or classroom rosters or any other thing you want to use for. Afterwards, we need to have a discussion about the setup of channels. So because of any team owner or member with the appropriate permissions can create channels in a team. So it's important to consider the goal of each channel. Like options include, for example, collaboration around projects, discussion of topics, or areas of common interest, for example. By default, every team includes a general channel. So most teams need more than this, and add members will create also additional channels inside it. So it's likely that the set of channels will grow organically as new topics or topics arise, and discussion might outgrow the channel they began in. So to spark the interest, the channel owner can post a welcome message, for example, upload relevant documents to the Files tab, or add tabs or connectors to the channel. The owner also sets the channel description and can auto-favorite important channels to their list by default for all team members. So you see, you have a lot of capabilities as well to bring up a great onboarding experience to your users. Next, let's come to the stage 2, the middle. So as the teamwork begins, the team membership probably begins to evolve, so along with the channel hierarchy. Unless the team needs to be strictly controlled and locked down, it's a good idea to encourage exploration even if it leads to a dead end. As users get more comfortable, they can experiment with the add team mentions, so marking channels as favorite and using the general channel to get comfortable with posting. Each team is different, so let usage guide the evolution of the design. Monitor the usage and health of the team via Teams reporting capabilities is a very important task you need to do during this specific stage. The trust, tolerance and the spirit of a collaboration grow in the meantime organically, so as key group communications are initiated and sustained in teams basically. The team members see the usefulness of group conversations over one-on-one chats. Individual teams, for example, also tend to develop their own personality, aided by fun features like givers and stickers. At the same time, it's very important that rogue or rude behavior be discouraged at any time in the course. That's really a very important topic. You really need to think about it to control that. We have a lot of good mechanisms inside of the Microsoft 365 suite where we can specifically work on these topics. We can control the communications. We can also filter rogue or rude behavior inside of the Microsoft Teams environment. Because teams are a living organism, they actually need to be checked on and cared for. So just let me give you some best practices. So use champions to sustain usage if it starts to drop, and also to discover and propagate, create new behaviors, for example. Manage the guests, making sure they have the right access at the ends, what the specific business in this case needs. And let channels evolve with business needs, so adding new ones as necessary and allowing old ones to fade out, or consider archiving or deleting them in a specific time frame. Also carve out new teams as larger groups or interest-based areas merge, for example. Try also different channel collaborations, such as the channel meetings or the tab conversations around documents. Basically, if a team starts to get into a route, consider the following things. Driving the communications into Teams as opposed to email. Using the mobile apps to increase the engagement, for example, and running the number of channels. That's a quite important discussion we need to go inside of the middle stage, the stage 2 in this case. And stage 3, at the end stage, obviously we need to talk about the definition what the end of a team's life looks like. So when the work of a team has run its course, and it's important to formally acknowledge that it's over, like we also talk about sunsetting a team. This gives teams members a sense of closure and also prevents anyone from accessing outdated or stale information, for example. You can use the team itself to conduct closure rituals like postmortems and executive summaries, for example. From the technical perspective, you can delete teams that you know you don't need. For example, a team created poorly for testing or a team that contains sensitive data. Teams are actually deleted with a soft delete that IT can reverse for up to 21 days, 30 days for Microsoft 365 groups. That's an important number you need to know. And deleting teams doesn't affect any chats or content that were retained in an accordance with a compliance policy, for example. Channels also have a soft delete, and they can also be reversed up to 21 days after the deletion. You can also use the expiration or intention policy in addition to archiving capabilities to reduce exposures from teams that aren't active any longer or whose owners have left the organization, for example. So to define usage scenarios for Microsoft Teams, you should really make sure that you understand the several important business projects or scenarios that will be in scope of your implementation phase. It's a great idea to really take a look at the list of examples and scenarios Microsoft provides in this case, and to really bring that in the game for an early adapter program. You can, for example, start with easy wins like personal productivity, modern project management, or modern meetings, for example. Or additional scenarios like the employee engagement and communication. You can bring campaigns to market faster. You can increase the sales productivity and grow revenue. Or you can, for example, streamline business reviews and such a thing. So as you can see in the slide here, we have for Microsoft Teams a specific use case of each scenario. You see, for example, the customer support, what you can do with the human resources, the engineering, marketing, sales and finance, and the operations and project management. And it gives you a lot of great ideas to start your implementation or your, better saying, journey inside of Microsoft Teams. Really take a closer look on that to make you more familiar with this, because this gives you some more hints and information and experience from other projects that Microsoft delivers exactly with these example scenarios. Next, we will talk about the implementation of the governance features in Microsoft Teams and the typical stuff about the adaption framework for each phase, the governance quick start, and many more topics that we can deliver for you, that you have it easier really to start with your Microsoft Teams implementation. Another good start to work with Microsoft Teams is to work through the adoption framework by each phase that Microsoft provides, because Microsoft 365 and Office 365 have an adoption framework that applies to major workloads in the service. This specific framework addresses the core steps that any organization should take to support the cloud services. We have the three-step model. That's the startup itself, obviously. In this first phase, you will gather your team together, set up initial teams, and use Teams to begin planning Teams adoption, for example. This approach will increase your technical familiarity with the product itself and help you to build the skills necessary to successfully complete the subsequent phases. On the experiment step, in this specific phase of a controlled growth, let's say, you bring your internal champions and early adopters on board. You'll speak with your business users to identify scenarios that would immediately benefit from the collaboration and communications capabilities that Teams provides itself. You gather feedback that will inform your broad-scale adoption phase, and you will make some service decisions about governance and lifecycle management that will ensure a successful deployment. On step 3, for the scale, this is the broad-scale deployment phase in which you'll turn on Teams capabilities for all your employees. In this phase, the size of your organization will determine whether this is a go big project that will turn on Teams for all employees simultaneously, or if you'll approach it by region, business unit, or other methods of segmenting your employment population in this case. In this phase, you'll move to a continuous delivery model. So employees, leaders, and business units will want to expand their use of Teams and will require the specific training and your engagement to understand how the best use Teams and other features of the Microsoft 365 or Office 365 story. Let's start to dig a little bit deeper into the experiment phase, the step 2, where we want to talk about the governance quick start that Microsoft delivers for you, where you have many decisions you can do on a really great plan that is provided by Microsoft itself. For this phase, you need to obviously have the right persons, the stakeholders in the game. You need to identify the good candidates for really onboarding of that, and obviously you need to have the specific individuals that provides the specific use cases and provides all the information and feedback you need to work through the governance quick start itself. On this slide we see the 7 major decisions of the governance quick start guide for Microsoft Teams. We have the 7 decisions: the who can create teams, the team's naming conventions, guest access, the approved apps, and do we want to add meetings in our test, the data security, and the specific length of the experiment. Basically, as I already mentioned, it's a good idea really to restrict in the first phase who is able to create teams, and in the back end Microsoft 365 groups. The second decision is how to work with Teams naming conventions. That's a very important topic, that you have really a good strategy for Teams naming conventions. What we have for that is we can work with technical capabilities of Azure Active Directory, for example, for building the groups and teams with prefixes, suffixes, for example. But that's not enough. We really need to build up a Teams naming convention in your information architecture and in your organization itself. On the other hand, obviously you should see who is allowed to provide guest access, who can invite people. Do you allow it specifically by default, or do you start in your first phase with the implementation without the guest access to be more familiar with all the collaboration tools, and afterwards you will start with the specific guest access. On the other hand, the approved apps, for example, only Microsoft apps or already third-party apps that will be provided through the Microsoft Teams application to the end user itself. So you should really look about that, because there are a lot of capabilities to add additional apps to your environment, and just keep in mind you need to support also the different use cases. So if you're not able to support it, it's always a worst feedback you shouldn't gather in the first phase. So it's a best practice from my opportunity to really work just with the apps you have strictly inside of your organization, and afterwards you open the apps for other additional functionality you want to provide. The decision 5, specifically, do you want to have really meetings included in your test at the beginning? So because I think it's a good way to go for, because the Teams meeting experience provides really a high quality. It supports the video chatting and brings really the employees together to be more effective, as is written here in the slide. So this is really a good opportunity really to also exchange feedback, to work through the different stages, and also really you can directly try the voice over IP meetings, and you can experiment with the different features. Obviously, on the other hand, we need to have a preparation for the broad deployment. So we need to maybe opt to use security labels to classify the types of teams in your environment. For the purposes of the experiment, we really recommend that you refer to the plan for the governance features in Microsoft Teams, and really ensure that a basic retention policy has been set on Microsoft Teams data in your Microsoft 365 or Office 365. Also, you may need to coordinate this work with your technical team, because really this is Microsoft 365 or Office 365 administrator rights that are required for that, and you really need to go ahead of that to also see the technical implementations that need to be done for exactly this decision. On decision 7, obviously, we talk about the length of your experiment. So I always, or Microsoft as well, recommends that this phase of your project be, for example, 60 days. That's a good number to really work through that topic, to get the people familiar inside of that, and it gives you a great opportunity to really gather the feedback. Extending the experimentation for a too long time is really that the risk is higher that the whole program is failing in your opportunity. So really don't take it too long. The 60 days is really a good number you should keep in mind for your implementations. So let's also see some basic common concerns. So I see it very often that we hear people will create too many teams and sites, and there will be duplications, confusions. We don't have any hierarchy, we don't have any conclusion what's really inside of a team and so on. On the other hand, we see it's also have to do with the guest accounts or with specific departments that should not have a look on intellectual property, and people are afraid about losing intellectual property, or for example guests that have access to things they shouldn't have, for example. Also, on the other hand, is that the people don't have access to the right things. This could also be a major issue or concern. We hear it also very often. Also, on another case, the performance will suffer due to many teams and sites, and it explodes, and we have it really in large organizations, and you really need to take care about these different concerns in your environment and your implementation plan. In the next slide, we see the different types of governance within your internal IT organization. The first one is the solution governance over the whole solution you will build, all the interacting services, all the different steps you go through, which features you activate. On the other hand, the discovery governance, that you really identify the typical issues, typical problems, that you really monitor, in this case, for example, Microsoft Teams behaviors. Then the security governance, where you see and check all the security features you have in place that are ineffective. They work for you, they really provide you to great security about that. Then about the container and content governance, and obviously the change management itself over the whole cycle of your organization, of your solution, and all the different processes itself. Maybe your organization might require that you implement strict controls and how teams are named and classified, whether guests can be added as team members, and who can create teams. So you can configure each of these areas by using the Azure Active Directory as a backend. So, but mainly you really need to think about the different decision points in that case. Do I need a specific naming convention? Do the team creators need the ability to assign organization-specific classifications, and so on? And obviously, the next steps you should go for is to document your organization's requirements for a team creation in case of naming, classification, guest access, and so on. And to implement obviously the different requirements you have in your specific team's rollout. The following slide gives you an idea about how to capture the organization's requirements. So for example, the capability of team naming policies, where you can use prefix, suffix-based operations, or to include custom blocked words. You need specifically an Azure Active Directory Premium P1 license. And afterwards you can directly record exactly the decision. That's a good way, a good framework to work for. The team classification feature also needs to have an Azure AD Premium P1 license and allows you to assign your organization classification like sensitivity to your teams itself. Then on the third option, the team guest access, is how you allow or prevent guests from being added to teams in general, or basically on the different teams or channels itself. For this reason, we don't need to have a specific license in Azure Active Directory. That's just included in that case. The team creation, obviously, where we can have the Microsoft 365 groups in Azure Active Directory in basics, that's just a configuration on the Azure Active Directory side. So you are allowed to do that, and you don't have obviously to provide a specific Azure AD Premium license on that case. But really think about it, and a good option to go forward to be in a managed process in the first phase. Then also for the team creation, you can also build up security group members by building dynamic group memberships. And this is a requirement for Azure Active Directory Premium licenses P1. So Here, what we have directly, we have the 5 topics: the naming policy, classification, guest access, and the creation options. And we also directly know we have a specific Azure AD Premium license requirement or not. On the other hand, if your organization might have additional requirements for setting up policies for expiration, retention, and archiving teams and teams data, like channel messages and channel files, you can configure group expiration policies to automatically manage the lifecycle of the group, and the retention policies to preserve or delete information as needed. So you are able, and you can archive teams or set them to read-only mode to preserve a point-in-time view of a team that's not longer active, for example. So you have also here the different decision points. Do we have specific expiration dates? Do we need retention policies? Or do we require the ability to archive inactive teams to preserve the content in a read-only state, for example? So also document these organization requirements, really due to implementation planning for these requirement features. We will also have this later on in the demonstration, that you can get a better idea exactly of these feature sets. Another important aspect of governance and lifecycle management for teams is the ability to control what features users will have to access to. For example, you can manage the messaging, meeting, and calling features, either at the Microsoft 365 or Office 365 organization level, or per a user itself. So really think about, does your organization really require limiting Teams features for your entire tenant? Just keep in mind usability, security, whatever. Or does your organization require also limiting Teams features for specific users only, where you have a high risk or any other kind of concerns inside of your organization? That's the same behavior here. Really start, document it, plan to implement it, and communicate and specifically publish all the policies to the Teams users, which behavior that they can expect from the solution itself. Let's talk short about the Teams template capabilities. So most properties in a team are included and supported by templates. But there are a few properties and features that are not currently supported. So let's take a closer look on the following table to really provide you a quick summary of what's included and what's not included in the Teams templates. So you see on the left side the team properties supported by Teams templates, like the team name, description, visibility, public or private, the team settings, for example, for member, guest, and add mentions, the auto favorite channel, installed apps, and the pin tabs. So what's not supported actually on the Teams templates is the team membership, the team picture, the channel settings, the connectors that are used in the Microsoft Teams, and the files and the content. So you don't have any copy or anything like that inside of your structure. That's an important topic that we really need to be aware about that. After discussing the capabilities of Teams templates and the limitation of Teams templates, we can take a closer look about the basic template types that are available. We have, for example, the standard template. We have the education class team template, the education staff team, the education PLC team, retail store, retail manager collaboration, healthcare ward, and healthcare hospital. Obviously, you can also go through the different calls about the Grave API to find out the different ideas of that, and to see how you can, for example, programmatically work exactly to use these template types itself. But to give you a bit of insights of these specific templates is, for example, the properties of the class education topic. For example, on the app side, here we have a OneNote class notebook that is pinned to the general tab. It has an assignments app that is pinned to the general tab. And It have specific team properties, like the team visibility is set to a hidden membership and this cannot be overwritten. Education staff team, for example, is that on the app side we have a OneNote staff notebook that is directly pinned to the general tab. To go out from the education sector, we take a closer look to the retail store. We have the channels that are prepared for you, like a shift handoff, learning. The basic team properties are set to, from the visibility perspective, to public, and the membership permissions are like the following, like you prevent members from creating, updating or removing channels, you prevent members from adding or, as I mentioned, removing apps obviously, and prevent members from creating, updating or removing connectors, for example. On the healthcare part, we have different basic channels that are available, like announcements, huddles, rounds, staffing, or, as I remember correctly, the trainings part on it, and there are also auto-favorited channels in that case. Also, for the healthcare hospital, you have also the same channels like announcements, but there we have compliance, human resources, pharmacy, and they are also auto-favorited. So you have really a great capability to work with these templates, the basics on that, and maybe we get more and more of these templates in the near future.
In the next demonstration we will take a closer look to the Teams creation itself. Let's discuss a bit more the Teams creation process and the governance tasks what we can do. So let's just add a new team. Let's say that's the new product series, for example. Product series. Products, let's say products. Then we can say, for example, the team owner is my CEO, what I have here, then jump. We see here also that we have the capability of sensitivity labels, what I already discussed. So we can use that here directly to say, okay, we have a confidential label inside of this scenario. Where we can find this specifically, we can go through portal office.com. We can go to the admin centers, show all, to security, compliance, better saying, both you can have an entry point to that. Just take a look on it. So we see here the classification, the sensitivity labels, and here is my all employees label, what I have already created inside of this tenant that we can work specifically inside of the scenario. So then we can define the privacy. I just use a public one to create this products Microsoft Teams here. Obviously what we know in the background, what happens is that a Microsoft 365 group is created during that part. So let's take a look here on portal azure.com. Azure Active Directory groups, and there should be a products group, this Microsoft 365 group itself. We see here there is no membership actually, but we have the two owners, what we already know from our creation process. That is then jump and the tenant administrator what I have done. I can also add the members here specifically to this Microsoft 365 group. For example here Aaron Painter, I want to add as a member to that. Basically what we have here as well is that we see here the group memberships. If it's a member of a group that's not related here specifically on this Microsoft 365 group for this team, that is one option what we see here. But we have on the other side, on the groups level, we have the capability to provide some settings. how we want to work with specific groups, for example. What does it mean? Is that we have an expiration level, that we can, for example, say we want to have a group lifetime of 180 days. We want to have an email contact. Let's say that's Dan Jump, our CEO here in this case. And we can say to enable to specific Microsoft 365 groups this expiration topic. Let's say this is for our products Microsoft 365 group. So here in this case you can basically see that we have this capability of expiration on this group side to say, okay, what's happening? That should be a renewal topic. Do we need this group further? That's the basic stuff what we can do here inside of this scenario. Also, from a governance perspective, what we have is we could apply a access review, that we say, for example, we want to have a guest quarterly access review, for example. I have provided here that for another group specifically, that it's for the video products. I scope it to guest users only, for example, and I do it quarterly. That's basically the stuff what we can do here. Let's take a few on this communications. First of all, we have the mail notifications that are enabled, the reminders. We define the specific reviewers, that's enabled for that, and we have a specific scheduling on that specific part. So that would be an example of an existing one. So let's just go short inside of that and build a new one. Let's say we want to have a review on the products. We can say, okay, is it, for example, also quarterly, like in my example? It never ends. It's scoping to everyone, for example, and the reviewers are the group owners of this specific group, like the products here, what we have seen. We can also link it to a program. I have just one program in this tenant for guests access, so I leave it on the default program, and I can say, okay, what's happening specifically on the completion settings. It's an auto apply to results, what the reviewers, if they don't respond, what happens. For example, I want that the remove access scenario goes in place, and we can also show recommendations to the user, require a reason on the approval, and difficult mail notifications, reminders, what we can use on this specific scenario. So with that, we have a quarterly review of the access of this specific Microsoft 365 group, and obviously on the Microsoft team itself. So this brings us a few governance features into the game. Okay, let's have a discussion about collaboration governance and what does it mean in Microsoft 365. Collaboration governance basically is how you manage user access to resources, how you apply to compliance to your business standards, and how you ensure the security of your data. Many organizations today are using a lot of different tool sets to cover this specific scenario. There are also team of developers using team chat, the executives sending email, the entire organization is connecting over enterprise socials and so on. And you have multiple collaboration tools in it, and because every group is unique and has their own functional needs and work style, so some of them will use only email, while others will live primarily but let's say in a chat or in a live event or whatever. So if users feel the IT provided tools do not fit their needs, they basically will likely download their favorite consumer app which supports their specific scenarios and needs. So also this process allows users to get started quickly, and it leads to a frustrating user experience across the organization with multiple logins, difficulty sharing, and no single place to view the content. There's the concept concept that is referred as shadow IT and poses a significant risk to an organization that you also see right now in the situations we are with a lot of home office and so on. And basically it reduces the ability to uniformly manage user access, ensure security and the service compliance needs. So services such as Microsoft 365 Groups, Teams and Jammer empower basically users and reduce the risk of shadow IT by providing the tools needed to collaborate. So Microsoft 365 has a rich set of tools to implement any governance capabilities your organization might require for all the different aspects inside of this field. Another very important topic in that field is that the Microsoft 365 groups and Microsoft Teams have a great integration, and it's the basic platform are Microsoft 365 groups for Microsoft Teams, to say it basically. So the Microsoft 365 group is a cross-application membership service in Microsoft 365. At a basic level, a Microsoft 365 group is an object in Azure Active Directory, basically with a list of members and a coupling to related workloads, including, for example, a SharePoint team site, shared Exchange mailbox, planner, and a Power BI workspace. You can also add or remove people to the group just as you would any other group-based security object in Active Directory, for example. So when you create a team, a Microsoft 365 group is automatically created to manage the team membership. The group's related services such as SharePoint site, Power BI workspace or others are created at the same time. So people who create teams can basically choose to use an existing Microsoft 365 group if they are an owner of that group, for example. Each channel in the team has a separate folder in the document library. So creating folders directly in the document library does not create channels in the team, just as a small hint on this side. So when you create a Microsoft 365 group in Outlook or SharePoint, the group mailbox is visible in Outlook. When you're creating a team in Teams, the group mailbox is hidden by default. But you can change that with the set-unified group CMD-let with the hidden from Exchange clients enabled parameter to make also this mailbox visible to the others. The group membership in BASIC is, for example, if you remove a member of a team, they are removed from the Microsoft 365 group as well. So the removal from the group immediately removes the team and channels from the Teams client. So if we remove a person from a group using the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, they will no longer have access to the other collaborative aspects such as SharePoint Online Document Library, a Jammer group or a shared OneNote, sorry for that. However, they will still have access to the Teams chat functionality for approximately 2 hours, for example. Let's say as a best practice for managing team members, add and remove them from the Teams client to ensure that permissions updates for other group connected workloads occur quickly. So if you add or remove team members outside of the Teams client, for example by using Microsoft 365 Admin Center, Azure AD or the Exchange Online PowerShell, for example, it can take up to 24 hours for changes to be reflected in Microsoft Teams.
There are also multiple places to have a conversation within Microsoft 365, and it's very important to understand where to start a conversation and which and how you can help organizations to define a specific strategy for communication. For example, if we talk about Teams, that is a chat-based workspace for a high-velocity collaboration, like an inner loop, and it's built for collaboration within the people you work with every day, puts information at the fingertips of users in a single experience, add tabs, connectors, bots, live chat, audio video conferencing, and obviously recorded meetings. If we go ahead through the Jammer, which is a tool to connect across the organization, like an enterprise social, let's call it like an outer loop, which provides communities of practice like cross-functional groups of people who basically share a common interest or an expertise but are not necessarily working together on a day-by-day basis. It's also a good tool for leadership connection, learning communities, or role-based communities. The Outlook groups, like the modern distributed list, like email-based collaboration, gives you a really targeted communication and upgrades the distribution list to Microsoft 365 groups. The SharePoint perspective, where we see there, is the core content collaboration experience for all the Microsoft 365 groups. So every group sets a connected SharePoint team site, and the share content, create customized page and author news is really based on this core platform in the background.
Now let's take a closer look to the end user impact and the change management if we work with Microsoft 365 groups. Basically because we have different scenarios, we need to take a closer look to that. Basically on the collaboration strategy for your specific organization. There are basically three main communication methods supported by Microsoft 365. The first one is Outlook. So you collaborate through email with shared group, inbox and calendar, for example. The second one is Microsoft Teams, like usage of a persistent chat-based workspace where you can have an informal, real-time conversation around a variety of topics, and you can organize it by a specific subgroup, for example. Also on the Jammer side, with an enterprise social experience for collaboration, for example. In Teams, we have this chat-based workspace. It's built for collaboration with people, your users work with everyday tasks, what they want to do. We can put information at the fingertips of users in a single experience, and we have a lot of different stuff like tabs, connectors, bots, live chat, audio, video conferencing, and so on. On the Jammer side, we have this community practice, which allows us to work with cross-functional groups of people that we can share a common interest or expertise. That's a basic program what we can run with a Jammer integration. On the other side, we have the mailbox and calendar option, like an email-based collaboration inside of that. So it's basically used for targeted communication with a group of people. A shared calendar can also be existing for meetings with other group members, for example. So these are the three main points. So the communication over the email, then you should instruct your users maybe to create groups in Outlook. If your organization, for example, heavily uses SharePoint or is migrating from SharePoint on-prem, you can instruct them to use that over the SharePoint team sites for collaboration. Or as I mentioned, that we can work with teams, that we need to instruct the users to create a team when they, for example, need it for their collaboration needs. Okay, let's take a closer look to the collaboration governance planning step by steps. So we have different components from 1 to 6, how we can create, for example, a governance plan for us and for our organization in that case. First of all, we need to consider basically the key business goals and processes to create our governance plan to really meet the needs of our business. The second one is to understand the settings in services, like settings in groups and SharePoint that interact with each other, settings in groups, SharePoint in Teams and other services, so that you really know which services are interacting together and that you can plan a better governance strategy. The third point is to plan and manage the user access, so the level of access you want to grant users in groups, SharePoint and Teams, and specifically as well how you work with guest accounts with B2B scenarios. That could be a great option here on this point. The third one is to plan and manage compliance settings, so you can review the available compliance options, for example for Microsoft 365 groups, for Teams and for the SharePoint collaboration itself. The fifth point could be the plan to manage communications where we review the available communications governance options for all the collaboration scenarios what we need to go for. The sixth point is the planning for the organization and the lifecycle governance. For example, to choose the policies you want to use for group and team creation, like naming, like the exploration and the archiving process, for example. You also should understand the end of life cycle options for groups, teams and Jammer, for example.
In Azure Active Directory, you got also the capability to provide the group's naming policy. As you can see here in the slide, you are allowed to add a prefix and to add a suffix. So, for example, you can use the prefixes or suffixes to define an example, like here shown, US, my group, engineering, and also do the different things. But be aware that not all attributes allowed inside of this naming policies. So it's just about department and any other attributes you can work with that. On the other hand, you can upload a set of blocked words that you, for example, you don't want to have groups with the name CEO, payroll, HR or whatever to control the namings inside of the group's building process itself. Typically, people in organizations work on different projects and collaborate with different departments, and it's common that users are added to many Microsoft 365 groups. Sometimes the projects are finished, but the Microsoft 365 group still exists. So regarding exactly this scenario, the administrators and users need to have a way to clean up the unused groups. The most optimal solution for this is to set an expiration policy, which helps you to remove inactive groups from the system. The expiration is turned off by default, so administrators really have to enable the feature in the tenant and specify an expiration period for a group, for example. When approaching group expiration, an email notification will be sent to the group owners if renewal is needed for an additional period, for example. If the group is not renewed, the group will be deleted automatically. If the administrator changes the expiration policy, the Office 365 expiration period will be recalculated for the group. So it's very important to know that when a group expires, all the group's associated content will be deleted, including Outlook, Planner and SharePoint. So however, there is an option to recover the content for up to 30 days from the expiration date itself. So that's basically the topic what you can really do here inside of this context. To configure the Microsoft 365 group expiration policy, you need to have a specific role. Basically the global administrator role in Azure, the company administrator or the user administrator. They're allowed to create, read, update or delete the Microsoft 365 group expiration policy settings. The user itself is just allowed to renew or restore a Microsoft 365 group at their own capabilities. As noted in this slide, the expiration is turned off by default. So you as an administrator will have to enable the expiration policy and set the properties for it to take to effect. So you will find this option in the Azure Active Directory plate under Groups and Expiration. So here you can set the default group lifetime and specify how far in advance you want the first and second expiration notifications to go to the group owners, for example.
Over time, a team created in Microsoft Teams might fall out of use, or you might want to archive or delete a team at the end of a project, for example. So basically we need to see the different activities. So when you archive a team, all activities for that team ceases. So archiving a team also archives private channels in the team and their associated site collections. So however, you can still add or remove members, for example, and update roles, and you can still view all the team activity in standard and private channels, files and chats, for example. When you delete a team, the team activity in standard and private channels and obviously the associated site collections, files and chats, they're also being deleted in that case. Just a note on this side, archive teams can be reactivated, but you can't directly restore a team that has been deleted. So really consider to archive the team first and postpone the deletion until you are sure that it's really not longer needed. So it's quite easy to archive a team. It's done in the admin center over Teams. You can just click that and select archive, for example. Or the other thing is you can go the process vice versa to say I want to make an archive team active back. So I just say I click unarchive and the team status will change to an active mode. The same process is to delete. I think that's not a big thing to go ahead like that.
If you delete a team, it's done over a soft delete of the team and is corresponding to the Microsoft 365 group. So you also can obviously restore the Microsoft 365 groups, and it's really retained up to 30 days. So if the team will not be required in the future, you really should keep care about cleaning up your teams in itself. You find it in the admin center under select the teams. Select the team by clicking the team name, and you just select the delete. To restore a deleted team, you can go over the typical restore process that is mentioned here, in this case up to 30 days. Another important topic are the messaging policies. Basically, messaging policies are used to control chat and channel messaging features for users. So they can provide and deny messaging actions for users, such as the possibility to delete sent messages, access to memes, sticker, Giphy, or the ability of users to remove other users from a group chat, for example. All users are assigned to the global org-wide default policy by default. But obviously additional custom policies can be created and assigned to individual users. But any user can only be assigned to one messaging policy at a time. The messaging policies are managed over the Microsoft Teams Admin Center and through the Skype for Business online PowerShell CMDlets. We will see here a few rights, what you see. For example, owners can delete sent messages, users can edit sent messages, and you see a lot of capabilities here inside of this section, which allows you to control the different messaging activities of your users. After talking about the messaging policies, we go to the next major topic here, is a live event in Microsoft Teams. So you have basically a 4-step model to go over this feature set. So first of all, the setup, the getting and assigning licenses, and set up the live events policies, and obviously to set up the video distribution solution for live events in Teams. So live events basically used in Teams require you to prepare obviously your organization's network for Teams, that you have enough power on it. You need obviously to have the specific license model that it allows you to use the live events feature set, and the live events policies are basically used to control who in your organization can hold live events and the features that are available in the events that you create. You can use the default policy or create one or more custom live events policies, and after you create them, you can assign it to a user or a group of users in your organization. The step 4 is also an important topic, to set up a video distribution solution for live events in Teams. So the playback of live event videos uses additive bitrate streaming, ABR, but it's a unicast stream. So meaning every viewer is getting their own video stream from the internet. So for live events or videos sent out to a large portions of your organization, there could be a significant amount of internet bandwidth consumed by your viewers. So for organizations that want to reduce the internet traffic for live event solutions are integrated within the Microsoft Trusted Video Delivery Partners. So with software-defined networks and ECDNs, Enterprise Content Delivery Networks. And this enables you to have a really great opportunity to work with live events in Microsoft Teams. With Microsoft Teams External Access, team users from other domains can participate in your chats and calls. So you can also allow other external users who are still using Skype for Business Online or Skype for Business Server. So you use basically external access when, for example, you have users in different domains in your business. For example, Rob at contoso.com and Anne at northwindtraders.com, or you want the people in your organization to use Teams to contact people in specific business outside of your organization. Or the third point is you want anyone else in the world who uses Teams to be able to find and contact you using your email address. So if you and another user both enable external access and allow each other's domains, this will work fine for you specific. If it doesn't work, the other user should make sure his or her configuration isn't blocking your specific domain. External access allows specifically external users to find, call and send you instant messages as well as set up meetings with you. So however, if you want external users to have access to Teams and channels, guest access is the only mechanism of that. To manage Teams, you can also use the Teams admin site, where you have all the necessary information and all the stuff to add, create, better saying change, or do some administrative task on your Teams itself. So you see on the grid all the channels that are included, the team members, the owners, the guest count, the privacy state, the status, the classification, and the group ID if you dig deeper inside of this administrative tool. Furthermore, you can also do here the different tasks. As you see there, you can also auto-favorite on the different channels. But keep in mind, the channel itself can't be removed. You can add, remove owners, members, and all of the stuff inside of this configuration topic. In the next section, we will start with the implementation of security features in Microsoft Teams, that you also, beside on the governance features, you are able to provide the accurate security for your Microsoft Teams environment. Microsoft Teams is basically built on the Microsoft 365 and Office 365 hyperscale enterprise-grade cloud, and it's delivering the advanced security and compliance capabilities for you as a customer or organization or the administrator. Basically, Teams enforces team-wide and organization-wide two-factor authentication, single sign-on through the Active Directory, and the encryption of data in transit and at rest. So in deep, files are stored in SharePoint and are backed by SharePoint encryption, for example. Notes are stored in OneNote and are backed by the OneNote encryption mechanism in the background. The OneNote data is stored in the team SharePoint site. The Wiki tab can also be used for note taking, and its content is also stored within the team SharePoint site. Additional functionality like the Microsoft Defender for Office 365, which was previously called the Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection feature set, provides some feature sets for Microsoft Teams along all the different capabilities of SharePoint and OneDrive, and allows you to determine if content in this application is malicious in nature and block this content from user access. On the other hand, we have the safe links that's specifically not available during this time for Microsoft Teams. There's a public preview and specifically over the tab program. And while a release date for general availability isn't set, so later on you get more information on the websites of Microsoft to see it's available or not. Then the safe attachments, that's a specific feature that is designed to enhance user security by checking for detecting malicious attachments. Conditional access is a specific package for the whole Azure Active Directory story and all the other applications where you are allowed to implement zero access implementation model. So that's the base topic here, the zero trust model. Exchange Online, SharePoint, Sky for Business Online, and all the functionality behind that can be totally integrated into that specific scenario. Teams has also a wide range of information to help you with the typical compliance areas, including, for example, communication compliance for channels, chats and attachments, retention policies, data loss prevention, e-discovery and legal hold for channels, chats and files, and further for the audit log search, for example. Then we have the information barriers, where we can set policies as a Teams administrator to do things like keep people or groups from communicating with each other. That's maybe done because of regulatory reasons to block them to doing that. Otherwise, we have the communication compliance in Microsoft 365 that allows you to add users in scope policies that can be configured to examine Microsoft Teams communications for offensive language, sensitive information, and information related to internal and regulatory standards. Retention policies, we have already had a little talk about that, allow us to retain data for a specific time frame for regulatory, legal business, or other reasons. On the other hand, we have the e-discovery, the electronic discovery. That's the electronic aspect of identifying, collecting and producing electronically stored information in the response to a request for reproduction in lawsuit or an investigation, for example. To have a short note on the Teams data location, which you can find under the settings, organization profile and the data location, Teams currently offers data residency in Australia, Canada, France, Germany, India, Japan and Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, South Korea, South Africa and Switzerland, which includes the part of Liechtenstein for new tenants only. So a new tenant is defined as any tenant that hasn't had a single user from the tenant sign into Teams. Existing tenants from Australia, India, Japan, South Korea will continue to have their Teams data stored in the APAC region. Existing tenants in Canada will continue to have their data stored in the Americas. Existing tenants in France, Germany, Liechtenstein, the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, South Africa and Switzerland will have their data stored in the EMEA region. In the following slide we see the different location of Teams data at rest. Just to make a few examples, the message topic is from the chat service, is a table storage and it's moving to Cosmos DB. So and specifically it goes to the Exchange to enable compliance features. On the other hand, we have recordings that are built on the media services on Azure that using basically a blob storage, and it will be done encoded to stream specifically. So if your tenant is provisioned in Australia, Canada, the European Union, France, Germany, India, Japan, South Africa, South Korea, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States, Microsoft stores the data in the following locations. So Teams chats, team and channel conversations, images, voicemails, messages and contacts, SharePoint online sites, content and the files stored obviously within that site, and the files uploaded to OneDrive for Business. So you see that specifically if we jump back to the overview here for the files, the team files that go through the SharePoint website, the chat files to the OneDrive for Business. So let's talk a little bit about how Teams handles common security threats. For example, a compromised key attack. Teams uses the PKI features in the Windows Server operating system to protect the key data used for encryption for the data transport layer security connections. So the keys used for media encryptions, for example, are exchanged over TLS connections. Network denial of service attacks. So if that occurs when the attacker prevents normal network use and function by a valid user. By using a denial of service attack, the attacker can specifically send, for example, invalid data to applications, send a large amount of traffic, for example, or hide the evidence of the attack. The eavesdropping, for example, can occur when an attacker gains access to the data path in a network and has the ability to monitor and read the traffic, for example. This is also called the sniffing or snooping. Identity spoofing, like IP address spoofing, occurs when the attacker determines and uses an IP address of a network, computer or workstation in your environment. without being authorized to do that. So a successful attack allows the attacker to operate as if the attacker is the entity normally identified by the IP address. So you see we have a lot of different capabilities to work through and protect our environment with the Microsoft 365 feature sets. Also against man-in-the-middle attack, RTP, replay attacks, spam or viruses and worms. Just to take about a few words about spam. Spam is an unsolicited commercial instant message or present subscription requests like spam, but in instant messages form. So this is the specific term that you just know what does it mean. Microsoft provides really a solid security framework for Teams, specifically Azure Active Directory, which provides really a single trusted backend repository for user accounts and all the different actions that can be protected through the Azure Active Directory service. Then we have the transport layer security, and Teams uses specifically industry standard protocols for user authentication when it's possible to do that. So that's a basic thing that you can work with these elements to protect your organization against the attacks. Another point is the encryption for Teams, how it's gonna using the traffic encryption. So for server-to-server interaction is an MTLS topic, for client-to-server is a TLS, for media flows TLS, for the audio and video sharing of media as RTP and TLS, and signaling is being done over TLS as well. So Teams uses basically TLS and MTLS to encrypt instant messages. All server-to-server traffic requires MTLS. So regardless of whether the traffic is confined to the internal network or crosses the internal network perimeter, for example. In the case of user and client authentication, we have the modern authentication MA, that is the Microsoft implementation of OAuth 2 for the client to server communication. So requests from the client to server are authenticated and authorized via the Azure Active Directory with the specific use of OAuth. So users with valid credentials issued by a federated partner are trusted and pass through the same process as a native user, for example. For media authentication, the ICE and TURN protocols also use the DIGIS challenge as described in the IETF TURN RFC, for example. To talk a bit more about participant roles, we have three specific roles: the organizer, the presenter, and the attendee. So obviously the organizer is the user who creates a meeting, whether impromptu or by a scheduling, for example. So the organizer must be an authenticated in-tenant user and has the control over all end-user aspects of a meeting. The presenter specifically is a user who is authorized to present information at a meeting, using whatever media that is supported. A meeting organizer is by definition also a presenter and determines who else can be a presenter in that meeting. Organizer also can make this determination when a meeting is scheduled or while the meetings is underway, for example. The attendee obviously is a user who has been invited to a meeting but who is not authorized to act as a presenter. Another cool feature in Microsoft Teams is the information barriers, IB, that are specific policies that an admin can configure to prevent individuals or groups from communicating with each other. That is quite useful, for example, if one department is handling information that shouldn't be shared with other departments, or a group needs to be prevented or isolated from communicating with any outside of that group. If the people involved are included in an information barrier policy to prevent the activity, they will not be able to proceed. So in addition, potentially, everyone included in an information barrier policy can be blocked from communicating with others in Microsoft Teams. When people affected by an information barrier policy are part of the same team or group chat, they might be removed from those chat sessions, and further communication with the group might not be allowed, for example. So there are different stuff here like searching for users, adding a team member, starting a chat session, and so on, as you can see here on the slide deck. Okay, for example, one department is handling information that shouldn't be shared with other departments, or a group needs to be prevented, isolated, as I already mentioned before. So the primary driver for information barriers comes from the financial services industry, because the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority FINRA reviews information barriers and conflicts of interest within member firms and provides guidance as to how to manage such conflicts. However, since introducing information barriers, many other areas have found them to be very useful. For example, in the following common scenarios, like education, students in one school aren't able to look up contact details for students of other schools. Legal, so maintaining confidentiality of data obtained by the lawyer of one client from being accessed by a lawyer for the same firm representing a different client. In the government, for example, information access and control is limited across departments and groups. Professional services, like a group of people in a company, is only able to chat with a client or a specific customer via federation or guest access during a customer engagement. Let's do a following example. Enrico, let's call him Enrico, belongs to the banking segment, and Pradeep belongs to the financial advisor segment. Enrico and Pradeep can't communicate with each other because the organization's IB, information barrier, policy blocks communication and collaboration between these two segments. So however, Enrico and Pradeep can communicate with Lee in HR, for example. This is the example we see here in the slide. So how we can trigger this information barrier? So like members are added to a team, a new chat is requested, a user is invited to join a meeting, or a screen is shared between two or more users. So whenever you add a user to a team, the user's policy must be evaluated against the information barrier policies of other team members. So that's one part we can work with. Also, if you have a new chat that's requested between two or more users, the chat is evaluated to make sure that it isn't violating any information barrier policies. Or the information barrier policies apply to guest users in teams as well. So if the guest users need to be discoverable in your organization's global address list, for example. So there are different capabilities that you see here, how an information barrier can be triggered. If you set up a retention policy for teams or any other workload, you can set them up, for example, to retain the data or to delete the data. Retaining the data is to ensure that for a specific period of time, regardless of what happens in the user app, it will be retained the data. So you need that basically for compliance reason, and is also available for e-discovery until the retention period expires. So for example, if you create a Teams retention policy to retain channel messages for 7 years, the messages are retained for e-discovery for 7 years, even if the users delete their messages in Teams. To delete the data is typical, I think, to delete the information and is permanently deleted from all storage locations on the Teams service itself. So with the retention policies for Teams, you can obviously do to retain Teams chats and or channel messages for a specific duration and then do nothing. The same for a specified duration and then delete the data, or delete Teams chats and or channels after a specified duration, for example. The next feature is a communication compliance. That is a part of the new insider risk solution that is set on Microsoft 365. That feature helps you to minimize communication risks by helping you to detect, capture, and retake remediation actions for inappropriate messages in your organization. So it helps you really to identifying offensive language and anti-harassment in the team channels or in a one-to-one and group chats, for example. The next functionality is about Teams interaction with a recording overview. So Teams has been enhanced obviously to support integration of third-party recording solutions. This includes the platform functionality, user experience, and the administrative interfaces that are really needed to provide an end-to-end solution for configuring, managing, recording, storing, and obviously analyzing Teams communications. This includes communications platform APIs and events for recordings, like for supporting interaction, capture between Teams users and supported calling endpoints, the new administrative policies for compliance recording, including integrating for Teams administrative calling and meeting tools and policies, and that can be enabled for Teams users with a separate license itself. The following example shows you a compliance recording solution architecture. So the core component of compliance recording solution is the recorder. So recorders are built as a scalable Azure-based services, bots that leverage Microsoft Communications Platform. And they are registered as an application with Microsoft Grave. The recorder provides the direct interaction with the Teams calls and meetings communications platforms API and provides specifically the endpoint for the media ingestion. Sample compliance recorder application is also available that shows you how to configure the bot, create the app instance and the compliance policies for that. This specific example shows you the API usage, the interactions, the call routings, recording states, and all the separate stuff inside of this part. The recorder bot must be deployed in Azure, or the recorder bot must run on a Windows VM in Azure. So these are the basic requirements that you can work in specifically with such a solution. Another great functionality is the e-discovery, and specifically for private channels. So records for messages sent in a private channel are delivered to the mailbox of all private channel members rather than to a group mailbox. The titles of the records are formatted to indicate which private channel they were sent from. So this is because each private channel has its own SharePoint site collection that's separate from the parent team site and brings files in a private channel that are managed independently of the parent team. So Teams doesn't support e-discovery search of a single channel within a team, so the whole team must be searched. To perform, for example, an e-discovery search of content in a private channel, search across the team, the site collection associated with the private channel, and the mailboxes of the private channel members. This includes all the messages. Another important feature is how you can place a Microsoft Teams user or a team on a legal hold. So that's basically, to do that, you can navigate to the Security and Compliance Center. You need to create a new case, which brings you up the option to place the mailboxes or sites on hold. That's you've seen here in this slide deck. So you are able to really bring that in the game and to hold on a team in a legal hold. Next search mechanism is the content search, and specifically also for the private channels, because records for messages sent in the private channel are, as we already know, to the mailbox of the private channel members. So because of this, each private channel has its own SharePoint site collection, as we also know, and we need to have really this content search option available also over the whole team. So also the private channels is included in the whole team, as we have seen in the e-discovery section before. So you use the same search mechanisms in that case. If we take a closer look to the audit logs, and specifically for Microsoft Teams, we can see the audited information about team creation, team deletion, the added channels, and the change of settings. And this gives us also a great capability to see the interactions on the typical team infrastructure, to see what's happening in the organization and how we can avoid any misusage, for example, or to detect any malicious activities in our organization. Another great option is to use Cloud App Security and this integration, where you can set activity policies to enforce a wide range of automated processes using the app providers' APIs, for example. These policies enable you specifically to monitor specified activities for the various users and, for example, high rates of activity, certain times of activities, and so on. After you set an activity detection policy, it starts really to generate alerts. Alerts are only generated on activities that occur after you create the policy. So in this following, you see an example scenario for how you can use activity policies in cloud app security to monitor Teams activities. Like to say, okay, I have specific filters, specific users that are affected, external users, the specific application, and you have a broad range of functionality in it. In the next section, we will discuss the configuration and management of the guest access, which I already provided an example in the day 1. To manage the guest access in Microsoft 365 groups, you can do a lot of things, obviously, from the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. You can block the guest users from a specific group. You can allow or block guest access based on a specific domain, or you can add guests to the global address list to identify them, for example. That's typical stuff what you can do. Basically, you can configure it over the Microsoft 365 Admin Center or the Azure Active Directory PowerShell for Grave topics with the Azure AD Preview module. That allows you to have really broad range of effectiveness on your guest access center. The following slide provides you a checklist for Microsoft Teams guest access. So basically the first step, you turn on or off guest access at the Teams organization-wide level. And then obviously you need to configure the related Azure Active Directory business-to-business connectivity settings. So you have two functionalities related to each other. And then we start to configure the Microsoft 365 groups, the sharing options, and to verify the SharePoint options, and to set up the specific guest user permissions in Azure Active Directory and in the typical scenarios in the application itself.
Let's go through the collaboration methods with guests in a team. Basically, we have the Azure external collaboration settings, which means that we go at the highest level for the B2B external collaboration settings in Azure Active Directory. So if the guest sharing is disabled or restricted in Azure AD, this setting obviously overrides any sharing settings that you configure in Microsoft 365 and all the associated applications. So first of all, really check the B2B external collaboration settings to really ensure that the sharing with guests is not blocked at this time or at this level. Then we have the Teams guest access settings. Teams has basically a master on-off switch for guest access, and also a variety of settings available to control what guests can do in a team or what they can't do. So the master switch allows guest access in Teams must be on for guest access to work in Teams. So really check also to ensure that the guest access is enabled in Teams and make any adjustments to the guest settings based on your business needs. Keep in mind that these settings affect all the teams. You don't have a dedicated switch on that. Then we have the Microsoft 365 groups guest settings. Obviously that we already know, Teams uses Microsoft 365 groups for team membership. So the Microsoft 365 guest settings must also be turned on in order for guest access that in Teams it will work for you. The SharePoint organization level sharing settings are the next ones. So Teams content like files, folders and lists are, as we know, are all stored in SharePoint. So in order for guests to have the access to these team items, the SharePoint organization level sharing settings must really allow for sharing with guests. This organization level settings really determine what settings are available for individual sites, and it's including, for example, sites that are associated with Teams in that case. So the site settings cannot be more permissive than the organization level settings. As an example, if you want to allow file and folder sharing with unauthenticated people, then you need to choose anyone. And if you want to ensure that all guests have to authenticate, you choose the new and existing guests. So choose really the most permissive settings that will be needed by any site in your organization. Then we have the SharePoint organization level default link settings. So with these settings we determine the link option that will be shown to users by default when they share a file or folder. So users can change the link type to one of the other options before sharing if they desire that. Keep in mind that this setting affects all Teams and SharePoint sites in your organization as well. And choose any one of the following link types that are available there, like anyone with the link, only people in your organization, or specific people. Then we have the creation of a team that we can also restrict basically on the Microsoft 365 group at the back end. That's also capability. And obviously another point is the SharePoint site level sharing settings. So you also need to check the site level sharing settings to really make sure that all happens on your needs in your organization. Then we have the invite users option, which specifically is the guest sharing setting that are configured that you can add internal users or guest users to your team itself. In the next demonstration we will take a closer look how we can turn on guest access for Microsoft Teams. Okay, let's go to discuss short a guest access scenario and how we can secure that. We have already seen that we can require, for example, MFA and monitor the session with this multi-factor authentication section and the cloud app security integration. We can also build that general to say for guests we require basically multi-factor authentication. It's quite an easy process to say we want to select users in groups and we include all guest and external users. Basically we say that to all cloud applications, or we can limit that specifically to Microsoft Teams or any dedicated application, and we can grant the access by the requiring of multi-factor authentication. But we have a lot of more functionality inside of this game. We can add, for example, the require of terms of use. So what does it mean? For example, I want also to include all guest and external users, want to use it for the SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams and Outlook groups in that case, and I want to grant the access specifically when they accept these terms of use for guests. Let's take a short look on this scenario, how it looks like, these terms of use. Where we find it is specifically in the section of the identity governance topics. So let's directly jump in. And we see here these terms of use that I have already configured for this scenario. So we see here the different languages, how it's required. It's specifically required users to expand the terms of use to read it. It's 365 days valid for that reason, and it's provided in these specific languages as a default. You can also use that. I put here a PDF file on this specific scenario. There's also reporting for accepted and declined ones, that you have it really in place. You can also do that over the audit logs itself. So it brings you a great capability to have a usage or terms of use basically that a user needs to accept this specifically. Good. On the other hand, what we have in our pocket is under conditional access. We can also say guests have only web-only access. So, for example, our guests and external users. Then it's specifically for Outlook groups, Microsoft Teams. You can also add SharePoint, obviously, for that scenario. And we set the conditions that we say, okay, this is for mobile apps and desktop clients, Exchange, ActiveSync, other clients, to really have a web-only access for this scenario. And what we're gonna do here is we require a device to be marked as compliant, or a requirement that the hybrid Azure AD joint device is there. So basically what we have is we have a web-only access only for a specific guest user, and we can limit all that stuff in this place. There is also another capability that you see here that's built in the background if we go to the SharePoint Admin Center, that we say we block the access from apps on unmanaged devices. That's also an integration we can use specifically for this scenario to say, okay, we want to block specifically the access from unmanaged devices. Then we have the guest session timeout. That's specifically that we build up a sign-in frequency of 1 day, for example, that they really need to reapply to the multi-factor authentication and all of that stuff. Basically what we can do as well is that we can work with sensitivity labels in that game and a data loss prevention policy to say, for example, on my video products I have maybe sensitive content. And what I want to do is that I want to remove the access from guest users for all this specific sensitive video products. So that could be an example that we can work with on this scenario. So we have this data loss prevention policy, what could be used for. I build up a sensitivity type to label the specific documents automatically, and I can see here that is enabled, that this is description. It works on SharePoint side and OneDrive accounts. And if we take a closer look on this specific policy, let's just edit it. Come on. And you see here the specific locations. Just click next here. I just go through that to the specific SharePoint site. I have here my rule that if a condition, the content contains sensitive info types, I use the confidential all employees for that. And if the content is shared from Microsoft 365 with people outside my organization. What I can do here is I can restrict automatically the access to the content for external users. That's a great method really to remove the guest access to your sensitive content on a Microsoft team, for example. Let's take a closer look how a guest becomes a member of a team. Anyone with a business account that is basically in Azure Active Directory, or a consumer email account with Outlook.com, Gmail.com or any other, can really participate as a guest in Teams with the access to Teams and also the general experiences. Guests in Teams are basically covered by the same compliance and auditing protection as the rest of Microsoft 365, and they can be managed within Azure Active Directory. There are many scenarios. In that case, you can also sync guest users from your on-prem directory to Azure Active Directory, start an invitation on that, or you can also invite someone who just have a mailbox on the other side. That's also a great capability to include nearly anyone to the guest scenario inside of Microsoft Teams. The guest access is a subject basically on Azure Active Directory, which builds up the underlying technology and obviously on the Microsoft 365 and the Office 365 services. Obviously there are also some limitations by design that you can work with that specific point on that. How is it built? Specifically, you will have an invitation that is sent out to the user. The guest user needs to accept the invitation. You have also the capability of a silent acceptance, which with the first access of the application, they start to accept the complete scenario. And then we have also other users. They may be sent on one-time passcode to validate their identity. That's specifically in that case when you just have a mailbox on the other side, which is not covered by an Office 365 service itself. Basically, the guest can participate in Teams channels, they can receive, respond to channel messages, access files. It really depends on your scenarios what you cover inside of this specific case. Okay, let's take a closer look to the guest experience in Teams. As you see here on the screenshot, you see exactly this message what we have talked about before, that we see, hey, you are invited to this specific team. Do you want to accept that specifically? Also, you see how many guests are inside of a team. As an owner, for example, you can also see that inside of this part. So when it starts, a guest is invited to join the team. They receive this specific welcome email message. Then it includes some information about the team and what to expect now they are a member. The guests, obviously, as I already mentioned, they need to accept the invitation by selecting the Open Microsoft Teams in the email message. That's the invitation link, before they specifically can access the team and its channels. All the team members see a message in the channel thread announcing that the team owner has added a guest and providing the guest's name. Obviously, you could provide with Power Automate or any other kind of services additional parts to have a better intro about the bio of the user, whatever you want to reach out there. So everyone on the team can identify easily who is a guest. That's important maybe for specific communications and so on, that you have a great experience on that as well. A tag in the upper right corner of the channel thread indicates the number of guests, as I mentioned. So we have a clear label on that next to the guest name. The guest user access restrictions policies are built on Azure Active Directory, which determines the permissions for the guests in your specific directory. Then we have the guest users that have the same access as the members. This is the most inclusive part. So this is one option about that. Then the guest users have limited access to properties and membership of directory objects, which means that guests don't have permission to certain directory tasks, such as enumerating users, groups, or directory resources using Microsoft Grave, for example. And the third option what we have is the guest user access is restricted to specific properties and memberships of their own directory object. So that's the most restrictive option, which means that guests can only access their own directory objects in that case.
If we need to authorize the guest access in Microsoft Teams, we need to have a look on the following diagram. So because each authorization level controls the guest user experience. First of all, the Azure Active Directory, where the guest access in Microsoft Teams rely on the Azure AD business-to-business B2B platform. So this authorization level controls the guest experience at the directory, tenant, and the application level. Microsoft Teams controls the guest experience in the Microsoft Teams only. Microsoft 365 groups controls the guest experience in Microsoft 365 groups and obviously in Microsoft Teams. SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, where there we control the guest experience in SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Microsoft 365 groups, and Microsoft Teams. So you see here the typical flow of exactly these scenarios. In the following slide you see how you can manage guest accounts in Microsoft Teams. So we have exactly these guest settings on the org-wide settings, where you can say how they can edit sent messages, guests can delete sent messages, GIFs, memes and stickers, for example. Obviously, guest is a user type in Microsoft Teams that is included with all the Microsoft 365 scenarios, like Business Standard, Enterprise, Business Basic, and the education subscriptions. Another important topic about the guest access is the Azure AD Access Review usage. So that you can review in a regular time frame, for example, quarterly, yearly, or whatever, your guest accounts that are inside of your organization. So for example, you can ask your guests to review their own membership in a group, a sponsor that can be asked, the owner of the application, also you can ask the guests to review their need for an access in general. That gives you really a good capability to work with these access reviews, to always recheck, is it really needed that the user have access to the specific resource. Okay, let's take a short look on what's coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow on day 3 we will take a closer look on the upgrade scenarios from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams. Specific upgrade scenarios, how to plan and configure network settings, and how to deploy and manage Microsoft Teams endpoints. If you want to take the exam MS700 for managing Microsoft Teams, I highly recommend that you really see the skills outline that is available on the exam certification website. So this provides you really all the content you need to study, you need to work through to attend to this exam. It's a little bit tricky, this exam, because it has really a broad range from telephony, information, security, and all the different aspects you have seen during the session with all the broad services that comes with a Microsoft Teams implementation in your organization. Obviously, we can't put all the stuff inside of a 2-hour session about security and all the stuff. So this just gives you the baseline where you need to have a closer look on it, where you can start with the tool sets in it. I highly recommend you really to use the self-paced learning resources on Microsoft Learn, where you can see the management of team collaboration with Microsoft Teams and the upgrading for Microsoft Teams scenario. These additional resources give you also a few of hands-on on additional information around all the different functionalities what we have discussed during this session. Hopefully I see you back. See you tomorrow. Have a nice day and really take the time to take a look on the additional resources. See you tomorrow.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I hope our participants will really benefit from it. Also, as an additional resource, let me remind you that this series on managing Microsoft Teams MS700 will also be available for you to watch on demand at aka.ms/enablevts and aka.ms/training center. You can also download the list of upcoming VTSs and register for those in advance. So thank you all for being here with us today. We'll see you again tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.